Hi.
Hi. So today we have with us Stassja, and Stassja runs the Coalition of Biological Reality. It's a Facebook group and a kind of informal coalition of people. Correct me if I'm wrong, Stassja, where we try and meet together with the intention of establishing in Australia the ability to talk about women as humans, as full-bodied humans, and as gay people, same-sex attracted, and all the things that we used to talk about 5 minutes ago without being doxxed and harassed and run out of town.
That's right. Yeah.
So, Stassja, maybe you could start just by telling us when you just said something's not quite right here. Let's try and get together and talk about it.
Yeah, okay. Well, I've got to back up a little bit because when I first started to realize that something was really wrong with the left was Black Lives Matter. After George Floyd was murdered, I was very much on the BLM side of things. I went to the march that they had here in Melbourne, protesting what happened and raising awareness about what happens to Indigenous Australians. And then not long after that, there was, you've probably seen the footage, there's this couple dining outside in the US and this woman refused to put her fist in the air.
Yeah,
and
I remember that.
Got surrounded by these essentially white kids demanding that she put her fist in the air. And I put myself in her shoes and I was like, this is absolutely outrageous. This shouldn't be happening. And I was like, oh, something's going wrong with the left. And then not long after that, J.K. Rowling kept coming up in my Facebook feed, and apparently she was transphobic, and I avoided it for about a week, but it just kept coming up in my feed, and I was like, oh, all right, I'll read it. And I was expecting her to have said something really offensive, like something straight out of the 1950s. And instead, I agreed with everything she'd said. And I think also I really resonated with what she said about, she thought that maybe she might have gotten caught up in this transgender fad that's going on. And I was like, you know what, I think I might have as well.
Yeah.
I definitely went through a very tomboyish phase around 12, 13, where I was sort of rejecting anything that was feminine or female. And I think it could have happened to me, And then about a week after that, I was in like this liberal feminism group on Facebook, and I got in this comment war with this woman who was having a go at me for saying pregnant women instead of pregnant people. And that was when I was like, right, I am going to read up on this, because this woman who was having a go at me just seemed crazy. And so I started doing my reading. I mean, she had argued something about, oh, actually, we all start out female with XX chromosomes. And, I didn't know enough about chromosomes and genetics at that point to know any better. But I was like, it doesn't sound right. But and so I thought, okay, I better read up. And I just found all sorts of stuff. One that really stood out was a piece by, I think her name's Laura Dodd. She's a sort of photojournalist, And I'd read some of her previous pieces. She did one on women's relationship with their breasts, men's relationship with their penis. And this one, and they had been published in, you know, major news outlets. And I think one or maybe both of them had been turned into books. I can't remember now. But this one was on detransitioners, and they were all lesbian women who had taken the testosterone, had had their breasts removed, and had realized in their 20s that it had all been a big mistake. And that really impacted me. And I could just see that we should not be offering these surgeries or hormones to kids.
No.
There is no way to predict who's going to regret it and who's going to be comfortable with it or happy with the outcome. No way to predict. So to inflict that on teenagers, I was just utterly appalled. And then I found LGB groups, and even though I'm hetero, they welcomed me in, and one of those groups was LGB Australia on Facebook, who had just dropped the T. And so it was like this free for all. It was like everyone could say what they thought, and there were big comment wars going on. And that was really fun for about a week.
Yeah. Until the it's always fun until the death threats start, or, you know, the Facebook starts to censor, or something starts to happen that's, you know, fairly typical now, isn't it? We're now watching the same script over and over again of a woman or a gay person who starts to say something and gets into an online war, and then, you know, typically the employer will be told, or something like that happens, and we all get smacked on the hand for wrongthink.
It's outrageous. And, you know, in those early days, before I had found the others and found the term gender critical, I remember I was sitting there reading stuff and just whispering out loud to myself, going, oh my God, this is Orwellian. This is Orwellian. And it really is.
Yeah, it's a violation of the principles of the liberal state. And that's what I first, you know, people say to me, when did you peak? And it wasn't this. It was the way that the left was Kevin Rudd first when I saw it. And he was starting to violate the principles of the liberal state. And I thought, I don't like that. I don't like it.
Well, that's a while back.
Yeah, well, it was during a same-sex marriage debate, which they were always going to win, which was what bothered me. People were always going to, I think, be in favour of gays, but the way they used it, and he was on Q&A and he said that the Bible endorses slavery, and I thought, you know what, he's a Prime Minister of Australia and he doesn't need to say that. That's not the right thing for a Prime Minister to say. It's a violation of the church and state issue.
Why did he say that?
Because he was in favour, because he'd flipped on same-sex marriage. People said, oh, you're a Christian. And he said, oh, yes, but the Bible says all sorts of things, was what he said. But he needn't have said that. All he needed to say was that marriage is a secular institution. The state marriage is a secular institution, and it's separate from the church. That's all he needed to say. But what he was doing is he was putting one ideology on top of the other. And you don't, that's not what's done. You know, if you have a secular state, it's not an atheist state. It's a state that's free of both religion and ideology, and particularly ideology that crushes religion. So I could see just gradually, because I was a Christian, I was very conscious of things violating freedom of religion. So when he was starting to construct arguments that were putting another ideology on top, I started to get suspicious. And that's when I started to say, I tuned my ear in. I think that's what we do. We start to tune our ear into something that's wrong, and we try and figure it out. And for me, that's when it started.
Okay, that's interesting. Look, I voted yes for same-sex marriage, and
yes,
to now see what the LGBTQIA plus lobby is doing to lesbian people just breaks my heart. It's like
it's horrific.
Become the homophobes. It's just bizarre.
Yes. Well, that's when I started to get online and say, hey, this is not right. And then people started to call me a homophobe, and even people in my own church. And that's when I started to think, you know what, and as I've said a few times, I lost, a very dear family member to suicide, gay family member. And they were saying that basically his blood's on my hands. And I took personal offense. I thought that, that I was offended. Now people call me homophobe, transphobe.
Water off a duck's back.
Yeah, I know, get offended. I now look back with fondness on the days when I used to be offended by people, calling me these names. And of course, what they're doing is they're weaponizing other people's oppression in order to instill a authoritarian ideology. This ideology is authoritarian.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You just reminded me. Do you remember years ago that young liberal guy? He and some others showed up at a drag queen story time.
I do.
And then, like the next day, he killed himself.
He threw himself in front of a train, didn't he?
I remember reading that at the time, and I think I even commented on a Facebook post where I read it, and I said, "Oh God, that guy must have had pretty serious internalized homophobia." That was my thinking at the time.
Yes.
So I can understand sort of how people are mixing up the two, because my idea of what a trans person was, or a drag queen was
yes.
They're a gay man.
Yes.
And then when you do your research, you find out, well, actually it's estimated by Dr. Ray Blanchard that around 75% of them are actually heterosexual men.
Yeah, autogynephiles.
Yeah, and they've got autogynephilia, and it's very different typology.
It is, yeah. Well, it's the marketing that's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just not explained. And I was thinking about this the other day. I think even in the UK, we are yet to hear the word autogynephile spoken on television or written about in any of the newspapers.
Well, I think it's part of would be part of the Stonewall and here the ACON advice to not discuss such things, because they would demonize trans people. Trans people cannot be spoken against in any way, but then trans doesn't have a stable definition either, does it?
That's right. Anything and everything. The state media, they did a good they're a YouTube channel, did a good sort of documentary series about the transgender wars, and the guy who runs that, he came up with a very funny, like, paragraph long definition of what trans is, or what gender identity is, and it was just ridiculous and all over the place, and it really showed how nebulous this whole concept is.
Gender identity is the unmeasurable and shifting notion of what a person thinks they may feel at any specific moment in time about a fluid and changeable concept that either correlates with or denies their innate biological sex, or alternatively corresponds with that person's estimation of their opposite sex, predicated on their own personal perception of a stereotypical, yet ultimately unknowable and reductive abstraction of an assumption of that sex, for which they have no frame of reference to even begin to understand.
It has to be for nefarious purposes, because why else would they be redefining everything? Not just trans, not just gay, homosexual, woman, man.
mother.
All those things have to be redefined in order to make their ideology useful to the state, where basically it silences people who are in opposition to whatever cultural control they want to try and to place on us. We could say that's a conspiracy theory if it wasn't happening before our eyes.
The other thing it reminds me of is Brave New World. Did you ever read that?
No.
So in Brave, they made a really good series out of it for Stan as well. Access to Stan, highly recommend it.
Okay, I'll look it up.
But it's like this utopian future where whenever someone has a bad feeling or an uncomfortable feeling, they pop a pill and it makes the bad feeling go away, which I see the parallels between that and this demand from wokesters for safe spaces and making it safe, and language must be safe. And so I see similarities there, but also so women don't give birth anymore. Children are grown in a lab, and then they're conditioned to take on a certain role in society. So you've got the cleaners at the bottom, and you've got people running the economy sort of thing at the top. But the children are also indoctrinated to be bisexual. So there's a good passage in the book where they describe how this is done, but it obviously couldn't be done on film because that would be a child sexual abuse. But they're like teaching children at the age of 5 and 6 how to pleasure each other and making the whole world bisexual. And I see similarities with that going on
it's not far, is it?
Yeah, I mean, you've now got these stories about, all the 10-year-old girls at school are calling themselves bisexual or pansexual, stuff like that going on. And I think the access to porn has had a huge impact on this generation, and it's really messed up their sexuality. Yeah.
The biggest risk a heterosexual girl will face is violence from a partner, and that is, once we lose that, and that's what J.K. Rowling then went on to argue, once we lose the definition of woman, how can we then teach young girls, look, sweetheart, you're heterosexual. If you're gay, these are your realities. If you're heterosexual, these are your realities, and one of them is that the person you're attracted to may be the most dangerous person in your life.
Look, I think, and especially for that, there's a certain time period in a teenage girl's life where the risk is the highest that it will ever be in her life, for being raped, for being assaulted. I think it's like between 16 and 24 or something like that. And I really think that, we need to be educating girls around that in schools, telling them these are the red flags to look out for. If he's punching the wall, that's a red flag that in time he will be doing that to your face. I think that needs to be taught in schools, and also the history of the feminist struggle, because I don't think girls realize just how restrictive life was in the 1950s, for example, not being able to get a bank account without your partner or your father signing off on it for you. Those kind of restrictions that made women dependent on men and dependent on violent men for their own survival, being locked into that. It really needs to be taught in schools.
Yes, that's right. And that's patriarchy too, isn't it? That's another thing that bothers me with the intersectionalists they take everything from the material and they put it in culture. So they take patriarchy from the material and they put it in culture, and they say that patriarchy is an invisible system of male oppression. And I understand that. I understand the use of that academically. But actually, patriarchy is the rule of fathers and male family members. And so women who have strong and benevolent male family members were able to get mortgages, are able to do those sort of things when women didn't have that, when they're on their own. I know a woman she's in her 60s now, and she still struggled. She got a mortgage when she was in her 20s, but it was a real struggle. So it wasn't very recently, that banks were asking for women, young single women, to have a cosigner, a male cosigner for their mortgages. So that my problem is that everything, and that's what you've called it the coalition of biological reality. Everything is moving from the material, which is why when I started to come back, we align with rad fems. Why I was interested in the radical feminist argument, because they have hunkered down because Marxism is materialist. I mean, people call this Marxist, but Marxist is a materialist doctrine. That's when I started to also start to think, well, because I'd studied politics and philosophy, and I used to think, well, they're not really Marxists if they're not, grounding this stuff in the material reality. Yeah. So once we do that, we've got no way to talk to girls.
Absolutely. And I agree completely. It's not Marxist, and it's just bizarre that all these people that are calling themselves communists and anarchists are unable to apply a material analysis to sex and biological sex class. And I see it sometimes from people on the right who are opposed to much of the transgender movement, saying this is a Marxist blah 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 blah, and it really gives me the shits, because it's not Marxism.
No, well, it uses cultural classes rather than, so it uses a group thing. So it does use a group ideology, but the group ideologies are cultural political classes. So woman even now becomes, like, black becomes a political class. We saw that with Joe Biden saying, you ain't black if you don't vote Democrat. So they try and make all the classes political as well, gay, queer. And that's what a lot of the gay and lesbians in our movement are saying. We don't want to be called queer. We're same-sex attracted. We're gay. We're lesbian. So it disappears all those classes, material classes, and makes it a political and cultural class.
Yeah, it really does. And just the tribalism, the inability to even consider the opposing side's point of view. I've got to say, Holly Lawford Smith does a really good job of entertaining the ideas of the trans movement. Notice, like, she'll let the idea in. This is probably her training in philosophy. She'll let the idea in, sort of weigh it up. Sometimes she'll come to a compromise that a lot of rad fems wouldn't come to that compromise. But yeah, I'm really impressed with her ability to do that, because even myself, I've become more and more staunch about the boundaries. Like very early on, I remember being in Gender Critical Humans or something like that on Facebook, and just commenting, saying, oh, look, if a man's had the sex reassignment surgery, that's fine. I don't mind them using the women's bathrooms. And another woman got in the replied to me, and she was very polite about it, and said, okay, that's you, but not all women agree. And I'd really encourage you to sort of reconsider in light of how other women feel about this. And so then I took that on board, and now I'm very firmly no males in women's spaces. I don't care if you've had the surgery or not. So even I've become more and more more aligned with radfem thinking on these issues.
Yeah.
I guess another example is initially the Coalition for Biological Reality. I wanted to include gender critical trans people, and that fell to bits. We had maybe 4 or 5 trans identifying people in the group, and eventually one of them caused big problems and wrote a letter to the Mercury newspaper in Tasmania, like denouncing us. And I was just like, I don't want to work with, I don't think we can work together. I don't think this is going to work at all.
No, they're ideologically opposed.
Yeah. So now in that regard, I'm very much more on the side of, say, Kelly J, her stance on it all. Just big no. Yeah,
well, I think once you start to get boundaries in place, I was saying that the other day to someone about how when I moved right, I expected the right to bring their boundaries down on this stuff, and I don't think they've been very good at it. Because their boundaries, they're trying to make cultural boundaries as well. We need to make a biological boundaries. We need any definition of woman in law that is other than biological is ineffective.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fictional.
That's right. We can't, because the boundaries of it can be moved by interpretation, and in terms of our legal rights, we can't. As soon as we do that, we let the government define us.
Yeah.
Because it's a definition. If you say gender, okay, what's gender? Well, gender is, we know we can't define gender without using sexist stereotypes. We can't, and so all of a sudden we have no anchor to our rights. So our rights then are adrift in the sea. There's no other way, and it may mean that some people are excluded from women's services, and we have the ability. Where women in this fight are not given the benefit of the doubt in the way that trans people are. We're told that we will be violent to them in our spaces. That that we need to be. In Canada, they have signs in women's bathrooms to say, if you're uncomfortable with anyone in this bathroom, pretty much suck it up. Yeah. The problem is you and your bigotry. Yeah. So women are given, are being placed in this as the aggressor, when we know statistically that women are not aggressors. We don't know why. We don't know why testosterone. We don't know if it's a testosterone. We don't know what it is about men that they're stronger. And even MRAs mount this argument. I don't know if you've heard them, but they say that women are just as violent as men. They're just not as strong. Mm-hmm. And if that was true, then women would be, single-sex spaces wouldn't be effective. Women would still, because they're not stronger than each other. Some women are stronger than each other. We'd be bashing each other up in the toilets. We'd be bashing each other up in areas. But that's not true.
It's pretty rare, isn't it? Yeah.
It is pretty rare. And, they start saying lesbian relationships are the most violent. I don't know. But I know that these are shitty little arguments that are mounted against us to try and undermine our rights of association, which is to just associate with each other in some spaces.
Yeah. I'm just backing up a little on what you just said. I think that the fundamental disagreement between trans activists and gender critical, or whatever you want to call it, radfem gender critical, is whether woman is a biological determinant, a term describing biology, or whether woman is a term that has no link to biology. And that's where the disagreement comes down to. They seem to think that, as you said, woman is just this collection of stereotypes which are culturally constructed, socially constructed. Whereas, we're saying no, it's a biological reality. And, as Exolancic has pointed out numerous times, well, how come all these other mammals have specific words to describe the female sex, like doe, sow, hen, cow, all these words? Why is that not applicable to humans? Just ridiculous. And it like everything that this ideology touches just turns to sewage. Even like trying to have a conversation with a they them, or like it just bastardizes language to no end. Drives me. Yeah.
And I refuse to call. I mean, if I never have a friend in my life who says they them, I can probably live with that. I can probably cope with the limitations that might put on my life. But I refuse to call someone a bastardization of the English language. They're not. Sam Smith is not a they. He is a man. He is a gay man. And I don't think he should be, frightened of that or ashamed of that. But just because he likes a little bit of glitter, a little bit of dress ups, doesn't change his sex, and I think he should embrace it. I think men should embrace other men who like a little bit of glitter and a little bit of dress up and some high heels, good on him, go for it. But, don't take our friggin' sex.
I agree completely. I've tried to put myself in the shoes of these they, them non-binaries. And what I'm imagining is that they really think that they have transcended the stereotypes associated with male and female. And they think they've reached this higher level, and they're like looking down on the rest of us like, oh, you're all just so pedestrian, aren't you? There's kind of this spiritual element to it.
They've transgressed the bounds of the natural universe.
Yes. Yeah, that and what a sort of high that would give you, and this like sense of feeling sort of invulnerable.
It's a religion, and I'm not against religion. Call yourself whatever you like, but I'm not going to pretend that you're plural. I know that you're a single human, and I can see that you're a man. We're always facing this concept that sex is so difficult to tell. They say, how do you know? How can you tell that someone, to exclude them from, this is one of the arguments we face with bathrooms and change rooms. And one of the big issues, particularly in a nation like Australia where we swim a lot, and I brought children up, little girls up, and we're forever going into women's change rooms, pulling off their sticky swimmers, and people say go into cubicles, and these people are trying to herald us into these cubicles. Have you ever tried to be in a cubicle with, I only had 2 children, I'm having 4 children, to try and pull off their sticky swimmers? And we do it in the female space where we do those kind of things is an area where you're not worried if you're attending to one and one's running off in one direction, it's contained, you're not worried. But as soon as you put a male in that space, it changes the complete nature of the space. And one thing they say to us is, how do you tell? How do you know it's a male? And we have to pretend like it's some sort of, deeply troubling question.
So someone said that it takes like less than half a second for your brain to determine whether the person in front of you is male or female.
Yes.
I tried
Believe that.
I tried Googling that. I couldn't find anything solid, but I would believe it too. Yeah.
There are studies. I did write something on it once, and I got some studies and I linked them. As soon as you say to Twitter or the Twitter turfs, you got any studies, you come up with loads of them, and they're all, peer-reviewed, proper scientific studies, not these Scientific America new versions, where a lot of this is old research. It's old established science based in sex, and that's something that Colin Wright will say. He's a biological evolutionary biologist, and he says, I can't believe that at this point in my career I'm starting to pull out these old studies about sex, because the scientific immutability of sex has been established in science for so long that it's crazy that we're even discussing it.
It really is. And then you go back to stuff like where they've found a Viking, and it's a female bones, but it was buried. She was buried with all these like male accessories, like a sword and stuff like that. And they're saying, they were non-binary. I'm pretty damn sure that the Vikings knew who were female and who were male. It is just so absurd.
It is. And maybe they had a period in their society where women were warriors, like they do, in northern Iraq. You've got the Kurdish women who are fierce warriors.
You mean at the moment?
Yeah, well, the Kurdish women. There's Kurdish fighters, female fighters who are well known as very fierce fighters.
Yes. Rojava, Syria. Yeah, back in my full-on lefty days, before I got into all this, I was really impressed by what they've managed to achieve in Rojava, Syria. I mean, the police forces are all women. Their sort of prime minister position is held by a man and a woman. The commune system that they have at the lower levels, the commune, I think it has to be 60% female or something like that. Yeah. They've done an amazing job. I think they've done a lot. And I remember seeing something about, the police women discovered that there was a brothel running, and they went in and shut it down, and they get the women that were being prostituted into new roles.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot could be learned from there.
Well, I think part of this is a pushback against the women's movement. I don't think there's any question about that. And the thing of the progressive, what they call the progressive movement, it's not just gender, it's race, and it's, as you said, the Black Lives Matter stuff brought it to your attention. There's a range of, I know from my perspective, I've studied the history of feminism, but also of Christianity and the social reformists, Christian social reformists, who a lot of us are, Wesley was one of them, familiar with. Josephine Butler was one of my favorite feminists, and I mentioned there was someone on Twitter arguing with me, and at the time I've taken Christian off my profile because I'm just sick of arguing with people about it. She said, you're supposed to be a Christian and yada yada yada, and I said, well, Christians are got a great history of feminism. And I mentioned Josephine Butler, and she said, no, Josephine Butler was a progressive. And I thought, all you've done is you've gone through history, you've picked all the people that won all the really good battles, and you've said that they belong to us. And then you've made a movement pretending that you're all part of the same movement. So it's a fiction, it's a fictional narrative that they can have Martin Luther King, they can have all the best Christian social reformers, plus they can have all the, people that, all the battles that were won, Indigenous battles, And they can say they were all us, despite the fact when you look at the United States, a lot of the battles were Republican. The Republicans did a lot and the Democrats fought against them. So instead of saying, let's all just be trying to build a better society together, they build a narrative that they're the ones that are trying to build a better society and we're the ones that are all the nasty words, the bigots and the homophobes and the transphobes.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I don't know who, was it Josephine Butler? Is that who you said?
Yeah, she was a Christian. What she fought against mostly was there was a issue in in the UK where they could inspect a girl to see if she had a venereal disease or something, and the police could do this. So she was fighting against surgical rape, or I can't remember what they called it, but they would pretty much rape them with these instruments, young girls with no authority. Plus, that she was fighting with a range of other people to get the age of consent raised. So they increased the age of consent to 16 because women were being trafficked, girls were being trafficked. And they were saying they're bringing the 11-year-old girls into trafficking them into Europe. They're still doing that sort of thing. And it was legal because they were saying the girls consented. And so they made the age of consent 16 so that it's, there's no capacity to consent.
What time period was that?
It was last century. You're making me 18 something. So you put me on the spot there. I can't remember. But the century before last, actually. So it was probably the end of the 1800s. So it's probably the 19th century. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah. And she's a Christian woman.
Yeah. Well, a lot of Christians were social reformers, and they were involved with, particularly after the Industrial Revolution, and London became a cesspool. The people who were farmers were now workers, and their conditions were terrible. Yeah. A lot of churches were involved in the improving of their conditions. There's an entire history of Christianity that's completely ignored by the progressives because they want to take credit for all the good things that happened. And so they will say that they were progressives. Well, they were people who said, one of the things Josephine Butler said was that let's redefine what a decent woman is to, in terms of gender. I guess she was talking in gender, she can use the word, to one that doesn't allow women to be prostituted in this way. So let's say that a decent woman, a respectable woman, as respectable women, we won't allow this to happen to girls.
Yeah.
So
that's really interesting. Yeah, and we see that from the trans movement as well, where they like similarly are rewriting history. That like that whole the Stonewall riots and this, they're pushing this idea that it was led by a trans woman. Even this guy never called himself a trans woman.
No.
It's pretty clear that he's a gay man, and even transing Kurt Cobain, because he went up on stage once in a dress, he was trans. Like, yeah.
It gets a little bit too much, doesn't
it? Yeah. They're out of control.
Yes. Now, another thing I wanted to talk to you about was that there was a conference that you organised in Hobart a while ago.
Yeah.
And you got a little bit of, I wrote about that in Spectator. You got a little bit of something from the mayor of Hobart, and one of the other councillors were trying to get you completely cancelled from the building. It was held in the town hall. Is that right?
Yeah. So we put on gender identity and law. We got a number of really good speakers in. And in the lead up to it, one of the Hobart City councillors, Jax Fox, who is a woman that calls herself non-binary, she obviously took offence. tried to shut us down. The Lord Mayor was on her side, and the Deputy Lord Mayor. Those three voted for this motion to shut us down. But thankfully, the rest of the councillors, even if they don't agree with our position where women's rights versus gender identity is concerned, they were able to see how insane it was. Like, you can't shut down free speech in this country just because you disagree with it. I hope to think that that's where the other councillors were coming from when they voted on that. One of the councillors did bring up the fact that they might be in breach of contract law because we'd already, signed off to hire the hall.
Yes.
So maybe there was a bit of that playing in their minds as well. But it was reassuring that the councillors didn't vote us out. Unlike what happened to Feminist Legal Clinic in Sydney, where the whole council voted to shut them down, to kick them out of their office.
Yes.
That was crazy. Yeah.
It seems to be another kind of movement, a very authoritarian movement that is taking hold of the executive arm of government. But they are elected politicians too, so they're not even a bureaucrat, so haven't even got that excuse. They are using their council status to be activists, really, aren't they?
Yeah. It just blows my mind how this has infected so many levels of society. But I have a feeling that local government probably is like the most captured out of all the tiers of government we have.
Yes.
Here. I just get that sense, like it's this easy way for them to push through these unpopular policies without too much media scrutiny.
No.
I mean, I've never, not that I read the local newspaper, the one that comes out for free. Do you still get that up in where you are?
I haven't seen it for years, but maybe it's where I live. They don't distribute it.
Yeah. I just think it's an easy way for them to get these policies in. Don't get a lot of media scrutiny.
No.
Do what they want, and so people don't know what's going on.
No, well, there used to be rates and rubbish, didn't they?
That's right, and now it's any new toilet block that's built must be gender neutral. That's happening a lot.
Yeah, they're destroying our facilities. They're taking away women's facilities bit by bit. And what annoys me is the gaslighting. You get on the line, nobody, Sally Rugg came out today saying nobody's, was maybe yesterday, in relation to what Kath Deves said that, Kath Deves pushing back some of her comments about, some of her apologies about children being mutilated. She's saying no one's performing surgery on children. It's just, and someone else said to me, no one's taking away women's facilities. This is just not true. Yeah. And then you put evidence, it's only that one. And no one's attacking women in single-sex facilities, and you post 5 or 6 articles saying, it's only those 5 or 6. It's the constant gaslighting that we're getting, that we're hysterical. It's the same stuff that women suffragettes had to put up with. We're hysterical. We're making it all up. Yeah. No one's trying to take away women's facilities.
Yeah, it's really frustrating. And then I don't know if you've had this one pulled on you, like you say, male. I remember getting in a comment war with this guy. I said to him, males shouldn't be playing in women's sport, and he comes back with, but that's not happening. I'm like, yeah, it is. It's like trans women are women, so it's not happening. They're not male, they're women. Like, just that level of gaslighting. It's infuriating.
It is, yeah. And do you think at bedtime, when Mr. whoever it is in the comments wants to choose himself a partner to go to bed with, do you think he's got confusion? I mean, most of these guys are straight, or they have a sexual orientation. They're complete, and a lot of these gay guys who also are sticking up for this ideology, you never see them with, a non-binary woman or a trans man, and I don't blame them for that, because they're attracted to men. They don't have any confusion, and when they're looking for a surrogate, particularly some of these prominent gay guys, they know where to find a surrogate. They know what sort of people produce children. They're not non-binary. They're women.
Everyone knows what a woman is, especially the men who are trying to identify as women.
Yeah.
They know what a woman is, because their entire life revolves around trying to imitate what a woman is.
That's right.
Of course they know. It's just, yeah.
And sexually coerced. That's the other thing. Central to this movement, and I don't give a shit what anyone says, sexual coercion is right at the center of it, because they're always not just trying. The thing about taking away women's boundaries, the reason they take women's boundaries is for sexual coercion purposes. There's no question that this is not just a men's rights movement, but it's a men's sexual rights movement, a men's sexual rights to women's bodies. Because once a woman cannot define herself with her biological boundaries in space, in public spaces, her ability to protect herself and her children, like I was talking about the situation in change rooms, once I can't find a facility where I can safely take my kids' swimmers off and dress them, what I will do is load them in the car in their wet swimsuits and take them home. So it's not that I lose that facility, it's that I won't use it anymore for the safety of myself and my children. Yep. So women will self-exclude.
Yep, absolutely. There's a really shocking example of that really stood out for me on the website No Conflict, they said. It was a college-age woman in the US, so she's living on campus at a college there. They made all the women's shower facilities gender neutral. She goes in there at 10 o'clock at night, hoping that there's no men in there, and there's this bunch of men just hanging out. They've decided that this is where they're going to hang out and talk shit and crack jokes, is in the women's showers. And so what she started doing was walking 20 minutes, or I don't know if it's 20 minutes, maybe 10 minutes across campus to get to another shower facility that isn't overrun by men. That's what's happening to women.
Yes.
And to pretend that there's no conflict, to have all these women's organizations here in Australia just going along with it, like how incredibly naive. Hopefully it's that they're naive, because if they're not naive, then they're fucking evil.
They're corrupt. Yeah.
Sorry to swear.
Yeah. Well, they can. I think fucking evil is probably more is an adequate explanation. But people like Sally Rugg, and they were the people that I spotted early who came against. And I wasn't against people who came against churches in the same-sex marriage debate, because I'm not naive to the fact that churches were part of a problem for gay men and gay women in terms of not accepting them in society. I'm not arguing against that, but people like her would come against, like, there was a organization called Christian Lives Matter, which is a fairly right-wing thing, and so they're saying, but it's easy enough to target them. And she was making they had an event, and she organized something I can't actually, I won't say because I'm not sure, but there was a conflict between the event that Christian Lives Matter held which was probably against, they were against the LGBTIQ taking this space, which was actually on a church property or something, I can't remember. But when you look deeper into it, Christian Lives Matter are actually, most of them are Maronite. They're a Lebanese community. So they're from a community where Christians have had to fight to keep their own space and to keep their own religion. And so they're very traditional. They're at traditional marriage. They're also about traditional community. And in a pluralist society, both those people and the LGBTIQ can coexist. But when she posted on a Facebook page, she put pictures from the back where you couldn't identify that these were actually Middle Eastern people. And that there's not any conflict between in rights conflict between women and the trans movement. There's also other conflicts between traditional beliefs who the left try and use all those like migrants, and they try and say that they're the champion of those causes. But a lot of those people, which we saw in same-sex marriage, were not actually in favour of that. And these are conflicts we have to resolve in our community. And most of us can do it quite well. Most of us live in a community where we accept that our neighbour might be against a certain thing in their own life, but we live together in peace. But these people want to make their own ideas above.
There's absolutely this push to indoctrinate the world, and like I think these people really think that, oh, if everyone just thinks the same way that I do, that we'll achieve like this utopia on earth. And like it's just so removed from reality. It's never going to happen. We have to have these discussions and work out, as you say, a way to coexist. And you know, when it comes down to it, if it was put to the general public in a referendum, this conflict between gender identity and women's rights, women would win, hands down. We know that. It's around 80% of the population are not on board with this nonsense.
No, that's right.
And I really sincerely hope that this election, that the results are a wake-up call for the Greens and for Labor. You know, if Kath Deves wins her seat, it will just be so satisfying. And it would really send a message also to the woke media. They're not in touch with ordinary Australians on this stuff.
No, they're not. No. Well, I think the key thing is that in order to achieve their aims, they can't achieve their aims without tyranny, which goes back to the old, you know, John Stuart Mill version of liberalism. We can't impose our own views, and that's what, as Christians, we've accepted. Most of us accept, some haven't, obviously, that we can't impose our own views on other people. And we have a whole bunch of different views, well, within our community. But these guys are trying to unite, and they're doing it very successfully. I mean, to give them credit, they have managed to gain a consensus of authoritarianism and find places in the state to corrupt in a very successful way. So we need to be coordinated in our response as well.
Absolutely.
Which we're finding, you know, we're getting there, I think, in Australia.
You know, I have hope for us here in Australia. I just think that we're maybe three years behind the UK on this stuff. But, you know, even today or yesterday, Scott Morrison came out defending Kath Deves, saying, well, these are really serious surgeries. Not be taken entered into lightly. They are irreversible. To finally have that said in mainstream media, like that's that's a beginning, you know.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Stassja, I think you're doing a good job. Keep going. You're working hard, and it's not easy. To get it's a bit like herding cats sometimes as well, because we are a group of people who believe in diversity of opinion, and in putting up with each other in that diversity. And I think that's the basis of the success of Western liberalism. So thanks for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And we'll and also, sorry, I forgot to mention, Stassja has Angie have a Terf Talk YouTube channel, Terf Talk, every Monday, is it? That
Friday.
Every Friday it comes out. Yeah, well, close. And they talk to all the gender critical people, and do a recap of the week's events in the world of gender. So I'll put the link in the description, as well as some of the links we've talked about in terms of the things we've talked about today and the articles.
Thanks so much for having me. And really glad you've started up your own channel.
Yeah, well, I do like to talk, I think everyone can see that I love to chat with people, and it's a way to also get other people connected with who we're talking to. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also like to, I'm not necessarily good with doing the weekly events. I like to talk about all the theoretical basis and all that, shit that we go on with.
Absolutely. No, love it. Thank you.